it's really nice to introduce someone that's basically an old friend of mine. So hi, James. If you do not know James Taylor, he is a materials writer and teacher trainer. He's been nominated for an ELTON Award 3 times, which is a good number, but unlike me, he's actually won one. So he's won one for his Our Languages, which was awarded excellence in course innovation in 2021. He is the project manager of Active English, and he co-founded the Razor project, which I can't recommend enough, which encourages diversity in ELT materials. He is the leader of BRAZ-TESOL MAWSIG, that will be the materials writing SIG, and he is the joint coordinator of IATEFL's teacher development SIG. And we were just saying before we went live, pretty much a week ago, we were sat together in Brighton, IATEFL, and it's now quite weird that he's in New York, I'm in Oxford. And the bit, of course, that's missing from his bio is why we know each other is because we make a podcast together, but I'll forgive him for that. Anyway, this session will astound you because James is an amazing speaker. So, James, let's get block 2 off to a great start. All yours.
So thank you, Sean. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, everyone, we do a podcast together, the TEFL Commute. There you go. I'll give it a plug right up front. So go and search for the TEFL Commute. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's amazing to see you all here from all over the world, to see all these countries and the number of you here. It's incredible and very inspiring. So I'm really grateful to you. So as Sean mentioned, I'm kind of professionally kind of split down the middle, like 50-50. I'm very interested in technology and creativity, but from a kind of 2 different perspectives. One perspective is from as a materials writer. So I am a materials writer and editor, and as Sean said, I'm the leader of the materials writing special interest group in Brazil, where I've spent most of my professional career. So that's kind of half of me. And the other half of me is that I work with teacher development and teacher training, and I'm very passionate about that subject as well. And I'm also the joint coordinator of IATEFL's special interest group on teacher development. So I sort of spend half of my brain is kind of occupied in one area and half in another area. Of course, there is some overlap as well. When I was asked to do this talk, originally, it was going to be a debate. And for various reasons, that didn't work out. But it feels kind of very appropriate to me that it was going to be a debate, because I do feel kind of conflicted. I am in a bit of a debate with myself about the role of technology and creativity in our future classrooms. So yes, it feels appropriate that it was going to be a debate originally, and in many ways it kind of still is. So as I do this talk, I'm going to sort of look at different perspectives, and then at the end I'll kind of give you my own. And the way I'm going to approach this is by asking various questions. Mostly I'm asking questions to myself, but occasionally I might ask one to you as well. So let's start by thinking about technology from a historical perspective. So here's the first question for you. Can you give me examples of the technology trends that we've seen in the history of ELT? So this could be from any time. It could be very recent. It could have been decades ago or anywhere in between. What sort of trends have we seen in our classrooms in ELT? Let's give some examples here. So Web 2.0, PowerPoint, films and television. This is it. Yeah, this is great. Look at it zooming by. I love it. Cool. We've got, wow, interactive whiteboards. Virtual. That is the fastest chat I've ever seen. No doubt about it. Apps. Cassettes. Yeah, so you've covered a lot of different, I saw in the same flash, I saw cassettes and ChatGPT. So you've covered like a big part of the history of ELT there. Here's my list of some examples. Obviously, I can't include everything. That's not possible. But these are just some of the examples of technologies that have had quite a profound influence on ELT teaching. So then my next question is really a question for myself now, which is, has technology changed the way languages are learned? I've put it like this because I'm not just talking about the way that languages are taught, but bigger than this, but the way that students learn languages as well. How has technology changed this? And I think that when you think about this question, there are different ways that you can. It's difficult to argue that there are things that haven't had an influence on English language learning or language learning in general. So here are some examples that I came up with, and you're putting some in the chat here of your own. There would be more, but I thought when you consider these things, think about how students, or well, not even students, but people who are using English as a foreign language are able to use translation websites now to be able to communicate in English when they need to. So they may not be even studying English right now, but then they can just use a translation website, get a bit of text translated, and that will do the job that they need. Right? And then let's think about how people are using learning apps on their phones to learn new languages. Online dictionaries now. Think about in the past, how much more of an effort it was to be able to use a dictionary. Now, you can get an app and you can do it instantly. And social media and online gaming have given language learners massive opportunities to practice with genuine, authentic interaction with other people using the language on a scale that is incomparable to anything that has existed before. Nowhere else can people go and interact with other people writing and speaking, and there's no language learning component here. This is a genuine opportunity to practice. We've never seen anything like that before. Practice activities. If learners want to practice a particular element of the language, then now it's very easy for them to go online and find activities. In the past, you were very much reliant on the materials that you were given as part of your course. Maybe you would buy some extra books, you'd buy a grammar practice book or a vocabulary practice book, but that's what you had. Now you say, okay, I need a bit more practice of this particular language point or particular subject. You can go online and you can find thousands of practice activities. I'm not saying they're all good, but they're all there. They're available. And podcasts. Podcasts are an amazing resource for learners to be able to practice their listening, authentic listening, with a wide variety of real voices, real people talking about any subject, whatever subject you find motivating and interesting. The learners can go there. They can find those podcasts and they can practice. And again, it's about scale. All of these things existed to some form before, but technological innovation has meant that the scale has just become enormous and almost unlimited. So that's how technology's had a big influence for learners. What about for teachers? So teachers, one of the first big changes has been the ability to actually kind of do some of the boring stuff, right? The kind of the admin and giving feedback, the management systems that go behind teaching. These things now are much easier than they used to be. And we have these kind of this software for managing our registration for grades, and it's much easier to give the feedback to our employers, to the schools, to the students, to the parents. All of that is much easier than it used to be. Interactive whiteboards. If you have access to an interactive whiteboard, you can do things with that were just not possible in the past. You can use an interactive whiteboard to replicate a normal whiteboard, but then there are things there are so many more options that sometimes teachers don't necessarily explore those options, but just so many things that they can do to integrate other media, to be able to just pick up text or a picture and move it around within the board, and the creative opportunities are massive if you have an interactive whiteboard. Online teaching obviously was not possible a couple of decades ago, and this is I think online teaching has become a mainstream thing that many of you will have had experience of, maybe having to teach online about 3 or 4 years ago, but still the need this being just part of the kind of regular environment of language teaching nowadays. We can think about, okay, some people are learning in the classroom and some people are learning online. It's sort of become a regular part of the vernacular of teaching. Video, clearly video is a very common part of the language learning process now. For many people will be using videos. Teachers will be using video in the classroom. They can find things that they need very easily. But then they could also spontaneously as well think, oh, actually, in the class, something can come up, and then they can offer that to their students and say, oh, yes, actually, it reminds me of this, and they can find it. Google Docs has enabled collaborative work in a way that just wasn't possible before. The scope of collaboration that you can do with teacher to student and also student to student, enabling them to work synchronously and asynchronously together on different types of projects. So you could say Google Docs, but actually say sort of Google Drive as well, right? The suite of different apps there. Again, I think has had a profound influence. It did on me in my teaching. And then finally, mobile phones. Knowing that your students are there in front of you with their mobile phones, I think teachers knowing that has changed how they interact with their students. Knowing that you can ask your students to look up and find various things during the lesson is a thing that just wasn't possible before. So I think that many of us would agree with Nick Peachy when he said there has been a shift over the last 2 decades from whether we should use them, technology, to how we should use them, and which tools and resources we should be using and when. So it's this shift from should we use technology to how should we use technology. And I think that many of you would recognize that feeling, I think, when you think about your classes. Okay, so that's one side of things. Let's have a look at the other side. So when we think about how has technology changed the way that languages are learned, if you have experience of being around people who talk about technologies and new technologies, then there's a weakness that I have observed over the years, which is that people can often be quite unrealistic and evangelical, and often there isn't enough of a kind of sound pedagogy there behind what they're advocating. This leads to things that are quite shallow recommendations. Let me give you an example. So this is an infographic that I used in a talk that I did in 2015 about 21st century skills. I know it's a bit difficult to see, so I've chopped it in half so that you can see it a bit more clearly. And I used this infographic as an example back then of my criticism of the idea of 21st century skills, because I think that there are examples here that demonstrate a lot of the weaknesses of tech. So when you look at some of these things, so for example, like posting a question of the week on your class blog, unfortunately, I think blogging isn't very fashionable nowadays. People much prefer social media. So this isn't a thing that's really lasted. You wouldn't probably want to do this now, because if you're teaching younger people especially, they're not really interested in blogs. there's quite a few mentions of Twitter here. Of course, it's not even called Twitter anymore, but many of us don't really like being on Twitter anymore, and I certainly wouldn't want to take my students there anymore. And then some of these suggestions I find to be very trendy at the time, but very shallow. So things like make a parody of a hit song, perform in a lip dub video, or app smash something. Now, I don't know how many of us here know what app smashing is or lip dubs. I don't know how many of us have heard those terms in the last few years, so it's quite outdated. But also, even at that time, I don't think this was a good idea. These things can take a lot of time and effort, and there's a lot of training of students involved. And pedagogically, what's the point? What's the point of them? What are we trying to achieve here? Is there a better way? And I often feel like when people talk about technology, it's like, I have this really cool new thing. Let's use it. You go, okay, but why? Is it better than what we're already doing? Just because it's shiny and new doesn't make it better. Another element of this, of course, is about accessibility. Talking to you now, over 3,000 of you, you are all over the world teaching in very different environments. And some of you will be in the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art classrooms, and some of you will be in classrooms where you don't have access to those facilities. And if you're going to teachers and saying, you should be doing, augmented reality in your classrooms, I don't think that's very fair, because a lot of people just don't have access to that kind of technology. So let's look at some examples of how people were talking about new technology at the time when it was new. Here's an example from 1989. So this was about CALL, computer-assisted language learning. If you don't know what that was, I don't blame you, it was before my time as well. But it's the idea that students would have computers with them as part of their language learning process in class. And the quote here from this book about CALL said that CALL is here to stay. No one who has observed the atmosphere of total absorption of a group of students using computers can doubt its motivational power. With time, CALL will come to be taken for granted in much the same way as our OHPs or tape recorders. And I think what's really interesting about this final sentence here is that obviously it was wrong about CALL being taken for granted, but it was also wrong about OHPs and tape recorders as well. Right? And this is why it's very dangerous to make these kind of predictions, because things change. So it's an example of how people tend to get very excited about new developments. Here's another example from 2009. Virtual worlds was the big thing then, right? Second Life. I don't know if you were around then or if you remember this, but it was a lot of people talking about it. And from this report, they said, virtual worlds are expected to have a large impact on teaching and learning in the very near future, with pedagogical as well as brick and mortar implications. I don't know how many of you, if we did a poll, would argue that this was true. I would think almost none of you would say that this really happened, that virtual worlds did have this kind of influence. They didn't, right? It didn't happen. It could have happened. It was a good technology. It was very interesting. I enjoyed experimenting with it. But the bottom line is that it didn't really catch on. It didn't revolutionize English language teaching. From 2013, talking about mobile devices. Learning English through mobile devices gains credibility every day, and the increasing popularity and rapidly diminishing cost of tablet devices reinforce this by providing a format that really is capable of delivering courseware. It is clear that technology still has much to offer ELT. So again, this was 11 years ago, how many of our students are now currently using a tablet device to deliver their course materials? Very few. People still prefer a book, paper book, and a pen. And the software and the hardware never really kind of caught on. I'm sure there are examples where some people are doing this, but it never really kind of happened, right? Just a reminder, if you have any questions, use the Q&A box and I'll take a look at them at the end. Okay, so if you put a question in the chat, I'm never going to see it, but if you put it in the Q&A, I'll try and get to it later. Okay. So I think it's worth remembering what Scott Thornberry said. And he said, it is salutary to recall how such widely acclaimed educational technologies failed to live up to their initial promise. So this is something we should always bear in mind as we go into the future, because if you look back at many examples of technologies that were going to change everything, they often were overblown and it didn't really happen. As I said at the beginning, I'm not saying that technology hasn't had an influence, but often doesn't have the influence that people suggest it's going to. So let me take you back to this classroom here that I showed you earlier. So this is a classroom that should look familiar to many of you in some way or some aspect of it. And if you look at this classroom, what do you see? You see drawing, you see playing, you see dancing, you see kids making faces, interacting with each other and with their teachers. They're sticking pictures on the wall. They're using visual aids. They're dressing up. They're playing with toys. There's no technology here in this picture. And yet I don't think this picture looks out of date. I still think that a lot of classrooms around the world look like this. This is still kind of the majority of what happens in classes. There's a lot of creativity happening here, right? There's a lot of creativity happening. The teachers are creative. Assuming that they've encouraged their students to do these things. And the students are being very creative, aren't they? They're drawing and they're writing and they're playing. So then this leads me to think, okay, so technology's had an influence, but has it actually had a profound influence? Has it actually changed the methodology that we use in the classroom? Let's step back for a second and go sort of bigger picture and think about how technology has changed the world in general. Okay, so we're out from ELT, we're out from education. We're talking about the whole world. So my next question for you is, what technologies do you think have people adopted in the last decades that have really had like a profound effect on how we live day to day? Give me some examples here in the chat. Okay, be a bit more specific. What, if you're talking about apps, which apps? Because not all apps have changed the world, right? But what kind of apps? Okay, some very good ideas. Yeah, I can see some of my ideas here. Yeah, I think you've covered most of them. Wow, amazing. Okay, let me show you the ones that I think have had a really profound effect on the way we live today. So I think internet access. So obviously, all of these are underpinned by the internet. But what I mean here is being able to find information when you need it, looking things up. Yeah, when you're out with your friends and you're, oh, what was that film? You know, the film that she was in and this happened. Oh yeah, I found it, right? That kind of being able to just find information very quickly is just become a normal part of everyday life. Obviously, social media has had a massive effect that I think goes without saying, for good and for bad. Streaming of both video and audio, so our streaming platforms, our Netflix and so on, audio, so Spotify, Apple Music and so on, has changed the media landscape completely, again, for better and for worse. YouTube, I've separated because I think YouTube is its own thing. You know, how many of us use YouTube just as a kind of, I need to know something, I'm going to go to YouTube, and there'll be a video of someone talking about it or explaining it to me, showing it to me. It's a remarkable resource. How we use maps, if you think about what we did before we had our smartphones, and we'd have to, when I first moved to London when I was a teenager, the first thing you had to do when you arrived in London was buy your London A to Z, a little book with every street of London, their maps, and you would look it up in the back. Now you can just on your phone and off you go. Texting and instant communication, that just didn't exist before, right, in that form. Meeting platforms like the one we're using now has made things like this possible, where over 3,000 of you from all over the world can be listening to me talking in a way that just simply didn't happen, right? There were probably a handful of conferences in the world for English language teachers where we got anywhere near this number of people. And now there you are, whichever continent you're on, listening to me talking. I find that quite moving, actually. It's incredible. It's very special. And then I put shopping and banking. These are both really have changed a lot as well, that we can now do things with both our shopping and banking is maybe even my favorite one because it's so much easier. It used to be such a pain. Okay, so those are big changes. You know, so the technology definitely has the capacity to really change things. But then my next question for me is, but what's the connection between good teaching and technology? Because I don't think many of those big changes I just described have actually, some of them, but not all of them, have actually influenced the classroom very much. So this is an interesting question, but to answer it, firstly, we have to talk about, well, what does it mean to be a good teacher? So I'll give you some examples of different research. The first one from the Sutton Trust, this is how they defined good teaching. Okay, content knowledge, quality of instructions, including the students, asking questions, checking responses, spacing out study or practice is an interesting one, making students take tests or generate answers. What about another research, this one from Harvard? Good teaching involves knowing the students well, modeling how to learn, focusing on the students and empathy, personal relationships, taking your students seriously, being able to improvise, which is a very creative endeavor, of course. You love to learn, you can be reflective, and you pay attention to how you're communicating. And then if we look at ELT specifically in how to teach English, Jeremy Harmer asked people about what it means to be a good teacher, and they gave him these suggestions. To be interesting, to love your job, don't hide your personality, have knowledge, but not only of the subject. Be open and available, have an affinity with the students, draw out the quiet ones and control the more talkative ones. Be able to correct people without offending them, help rather than shout, and know their names. What do we notice about these lists, these three lists, which I think have got a lot of similarities between them, is that there's a lot of aspects here of personality, teacher's personality, of respect for the students, of classroom management skills, instructions, communication, empathy, and I would say there's a creativity underpinning a lot of this. But what we don't see is nobody talks about technology with those things. So I think it suggests that the answer to this question doesn't, there isn't really a connection between good teaching and technology. Technology can certainly support good teaching, but it isn't a fundamental, foundational aspect of what it means to be a good teacher. Okay, so I've made it this far now, nearly half an hour into the talk, and there's definitely an elephant in the room here that I haven't addressed. In fact, but to be more accurate, I would say that this elephant is probably more like this size than the other elephant. What is that elephant in the room, everyone? Yeah, Anna was there first. The elephant in the room is AI, of course, right? It's the AI elephant. We have to talk about it. We can't have this conversation and not talk about AI. It's impossible now. Here in 2024, it can't happen. So as Sean mentioned last week, I was at the IATEFL conference in Brighton, and I had the pleasure of seeing Vicky Samal's opening plenary on AI. And Sean, when he introduced Vicky, he mentioned the fact that the year before at IATEFL, there was only one mention of AI in the program, and that was in an advert. This year, there were roughly 35 talks where AI was in the title or in the abstract. So it was just this explosion. And a lot of talks that weren't even about AI, people were mentioning AI. And as Sean said, I don't remember ever seeing this kind of explosion of any topic to this level. It is remarkable. And again, I'll remind you of what I said at the beginning about how this originally was supposed to be a debate. And I am here debating this subject with myself, okay? I still don't know how I feel about it. I feel very positive about AI in some respects, and in other aspects, I feel very negative. So I'm going to present to you, they say you should never predict the future. It's a fool's game, but I'm going to, and I try not to do it generally, but I'm going to do it for you today. Just bear in mind, remember we saw those slides earlier where people were making prediction, well, they were saying very optimistic things about technology back in the past. So just promise me that in 10 years from now, you won't use what I say now in a presentation where you say, look, this is what James thought about AI 10 years ago, and he was so wrong. We'll see. So here's my optimistic view of AI. Okay, this is, if I'm being an optimist, this is what it could mean. So first thing is robot teachers. People talk about robot teachers a lot. I don't think we're going to be replaced by robot teachers. I don't think it's going to happen. Why? Because education is fundamentally a human process. It happens between human beings. I think people want that. That's what people want from this process. And I think that most of you would probably agree with me as well. There was a recent survey by the British Council where they asked 643 teachers this question, and 86% agreed with me that we won't be replaced. I think the only way it could happen is if it's forced to happen by people who are not interested in pedagogy, but are interested in money. But I don't think the students will like it. Learning apps. I don't think we're going to be replaced by learning apps either. I think that they're good for what they are, but I think that they're very limited in what they can offer. And I think that that you could argue that they'll get better in the future and be able to do more stuff, but I'm not sure there's actually much of an economic imperative for these app developers to really do the huge amount of research that would be required to make that possible. I think they're kind of ticking along quite nicely with a lot of people who are kind of quite casually learning a language. So I'm not sure that that is really much of a threat to us in the long run. My optimistic view of materials creation is that as a materials writer, AI can help with creating materials. It can help with other aspects of it as well, like publishing and marketing and so on. So there are things that having AI as part of our ecosystem could actually be very helpful. And I already use it for some aspects of writing materials, but not the most important bits. But the kind of bits where I have to do something necessary, and it saves me a lot of time. My optimistic view regarding assessment and grading is that a lot of assessment is testing, right? And really, this is what I'm talking about here. And this is the kind of thing that AI could do really well. So this is actually an example of where I think AI should be used. I think AI should be used to come in and do this kind of stuff and replace teachers who have to spend many hours marking tests and grading, and this is all not very fun. No one becomes a teacher because they want to spend hours grading tests, right? And connected to that admin as well, all the admin stuff that I mentioned earlier, that a lot of that could be taken away from the teacher. I think potentially homework could be rethought. If we think, okay, AI is making a lot of what we consider to be good homework now kind of irrelevant, perhaps we need to examine what homework is, what it means, what's the purpose of it. I have no idea right now what the answer to that is, but I think that could be a very good process for us to go through. And I think that if we're, again, being optimistic, we could use our lessons as places where we can prepare students for this new AI-assisted world, have them using these tools in the right way, help them to learn about the environmental impact, which is pretty big, and we need to be aware of that. They need to be aware of the ethical implications of what it means, to where this stuff comes from and how we use it. And I think that's a very interesting opportunity for us as teachers. And maybe there's potential for more individualized aspects of lessons, lesson materials, which are not, you don't just give the same materials to everybody, but you can give more individual materials depending on the needs of the learners. Possibly. I'm not sure about that one. Maybe it could happen, maybe not. But if I'm being optimistic, it can happen. Okay, let's look at the other side now. The pessimistic view, well, I think in all likelihood that some form of AI technology will probably decrease the demand of people who want to actually learn a language for themselves. I think that it's likely there'll be some kind of technology which, for the people who are more kind of, I just need to get by, I'm traveling or it's part of my work, but I don't really need to be fluent. If they can use a technology which can step in for them and do it for them, then we're probably likely to lose those kinds of people from the classroom. My pessimistic view of materials creation is that publishers may just decide that they don't need to hire so many people like me, and that they can create their own generative AI, which will be able to create their materials based on their parameters, and they may be happy with that. I wouldn't be happy with that, but they may be. So I think that it's likely that there'll be less jobs around in all areas of what we do, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but I think that it's likely. I doubt that teachers will be adequately prepared for these changes, because teachers are not adequately trained now, and they haven't been in the past. Why is it going to be different in the future? There's never enough resources given to teachers, and I think that I just don't see that changing, unfortunately. I worry that our students might start to feel that study is a bit pointless if they think, well, I can just get this, whatever this AI is, to do it for me. Why am I doing this? I can just get AI to do it. And I do worry about the influence that may have on some of our learners. Obviously, there are always learners, people who love to learn. Hopefully, there's a lot of you here today, because that's part of what it means to be a teacher. But there are always learners who are like, I'm just doing this because I have to. And if they don't have to anymore, are they going to be losing motivation? And then my other worry about AI, and it's not just for us, but it's about many things. I think that there's a tendency that AI will kind of be a bit boring, that materials and things just will be a bit dull. And a lot of teachers may be okay with that. And that worries me, because I like to have materials and things where the personality shines through, where it's interesting and unique and different. That's what I try to do when I create materials. And I worry that it will just become a bit boring. So those are my two sides. That's my internal debate going on there. You can see I'm in conflict. You've probably got some element of that conflict going on with you as well. Oxford recently published a report called AI in Education, where we are and what happens next. And these were their recommendations from the report, and I think they're excellent. You know, I love this idea of supporting teachers, not substituting them. Fantastic. 100% agree. We want quality resources in our education. Should go without saying, but it isn't always true. We should empower teachers to use digital technologies in the classroom. Give the teachers these tools to use to benefit their students, and give the students the necessary skills to complement generative AI. So let the students learn about how to use these things. Don't just shut them off from it. It's pointless. And finally, this one, of prioritize genuine topic understanding. So essentially what it's saying is prioritize knowledge, learning. And I think that's a fantastic recommendation. I like them all very much. The only thing I would add is we can also use these new technologies as a way of reducing the burden on teachers. Okay, so why don't we find a way of reducing teachers' hours and making those hours better spent? There was a study a few years ago by the World Economic Forum. In their research, they found that teachers were working about 50 hours a week on average. Less than half the time was spent with their students. They were spending 10.5 hours on preparation, 6.5 on evaluation of feedback, 5 hours on administration. Can we reduce those hours down and do two things with them? One, let's try and get teachers to be working 40 hours a week so they can spend more time with their families and at home and living their lives like the way we should all be doing. And can we get more teachers doing more professional development hours? This seems to be a much more valuable way of changing our education system. Okay, so just very quickly, because time is ticking on, there was research about risk exposure to AI in different professions, and I think this is good for all of us to know. Where are we? Well, we're in about the middle of this table here. Educational services is a very broad topic, but basically what this means is that some of the things we do are at risk from being replaced by AI, some of the things are not. People who work in data financial services are very highly at risk. People who build things and make things and cook things and look after people are very low risk at the moment. So with that in mind, what we should know is that, yes, some aspects of what we do are replaceable and some are not. So let's think now as we think about, we're journeying now into the future. And this journey is a journey into the unknown, inevitably. And so what I want to do now is recommend for you creative skills, qualities, characteristics that I believe will future-proof you in the future. Okay. So here's my list, 10 things. So like I said, I'm not suggesting here are like specific skills you need to learn. These are like qualities that we should have as professionals. And I said, I'm talking to you today as a teacher trainer and as a materials writer. I'm talking to you as teachers, but whatever you do, whichever aspect of our profession you're in, think about how these things could affect you. So let's just go through them quickly. Okay, firstly, connection. Connect with your students and with your professionals. Connect with people, genuine connection. You know, when, as you want experiences here, like Ray Bradbury had with his fan, where you have a student look you in the eyes and you can tell how much your teaching has meant to them. That can only happen with human to human interaction. They're never going to get that from a robot. Collaborate. Collaboration, we think about working with other people. Of course, that's part of it, but collaboration is bigger than this. Collaboration means you're collaborating with your students, you're collaborating with the teachers that they've had before and the teachers they'll have in the future. You're collaborating with your past self and your future self. You're collaborating with your institution, with the people who wrote the materials that you're using in the classroom. Just think about all those relationships that are happening to make this learning possible and open those possibilities up in your mind. Diversity. There are clearly reasons why diversity is a good thing. Look at the people who we have here in this room today, or over 3,000 of us, all with different life experiences, different backgrounds, different stories. The more of those stories we can bring into our classrooms, well, the bottom line is it just makes it so much more interesting. It's a much richer, more valuable experience. Plus, it makes your students feel like they belong there. Openness. Be open. As Nick Cave says, soak in things from around the world. Be open to new ideas. Enjoy art, watch movies, read books. Be an interesting person. Bring that into the classroom, and when you talk to your students, they will feel that this is someone I want to interact with. This is someone who has lived and knows things that are worth knowing. Be disciplined, though. Spend your time wisely. Don't waste time. Be conscious of the limited hours that you've had. Plan and build these things into your daily routine. Knowledge, keep learning professionally. Keep learning about the things that are constantly changing in our profession. I love our profession because we are here in this sort of interesting place. We're between linguistics and pedagogy. Psychology is over here. We have technology, we have politics, we have culture. All of these things are going on, and there's always something new to learn. Always something new to learn, and things are changing. So keep studying, keep learning. Practice. Try things and put them into place. Do it. Like, it's okay to learn about it, but you've got to do it, use it, try it. And as you do that, have realistic expectations, manage those expectations, know that you're going to make mistakes. Not everything will work. It's okay. It's part of the learning experience, as it is for anyone learning a language, right? Also, as a teacher, we try things, it doesn't always work. Challenge yourself. As Bowie says, go out into the water where things start to feel a bit uncomfortable. Don't just say, I'm okay, everything is fine here, everything's good, I'm happy. No, do more, push yourself. And again, be realistic, it won't always work, but you will grow as a professional. And then finally, imitate. Look at the people that you admire, see what they're doing and copy them. It's okay, right? You can do that. Find what they're doing, say, maybe I could do that with my students, or what I'm doing. Find a way to integrate that into your own practice and adapt it so it becomes your own thing. So those are my 10 tips. And they're all, for me, fundamental aspects of being a human. This talk was called Technology and Creativity, but I haven't explicitly talked about creativity a lot, because for me, there's a kind of creativity kind of underpinning all of these characteristics. And, a curious mind is required if you're going to integrate these 10 characteristics into your teaching. A creative mind is a problem-solving mind, and we may be facing kind of problems professionally if some of these technologies come to pass the way some people would like them to. We need our creative minds to find solutions, to look for opportunities, to find and to make and to recognize unexpected and inspiring moments in the classroom. And while we do this all with our heart, with empathy, We know that these are special qualities. Think about the most memorable teachers that you've had in your life. When you look back on those, I don't think you remember them for their classroom management or their instructions. You remember them as people, right? And how they touched you. So that's what you've got to try and do for your students. So we know, after this, we know what makes a successful teacher, right? And we also know that this is the thing that AI and technology is the worst at, right? This is the thing that it finds hardest, and it's going to take a really, really long time, and I think probably never going to be able to do these things. So this is the things that we need to lean into as professionals in order to make sure that we survive in the future. The teacher that just kind of turns up and says, okay, go to page 25, fill in the gaps, goes through the motions, that teacher is going to be quite easily replaced. Okay, so your job watching this today to go away from this is to make sure that that's not you. Okay, you're not the teacher who's going to be easily replaced. Okay, that's me. I'm going to look at your questions in a moment. If you want to connect with me, then that's my Instagram, my LinkedIn. They're the ones I use most. There's my website. If you want to email me, I forgot to add it here, but just add James at and my website. That will get to me. I'll go forward to I have my references as well. I'll go to those in a second. Thank you for your lovely comments. I appreciate it very much. Okay, so let me take a look at the Q&A now. Okay, so Vanessa says, you quoted Ray Bradbury. Do you think that sooner or later books will disappear, not burned, but just replaced by technology? It's a very interesting question. It seems like it should have happened, right? Seems like it should have happened. But I think books are remarkably resistant. I think many of us in the past would have said that when ebooks came along would have been, well, that's it, right? Ebooks are much better. But I think a lot of people really prefer the tactile things. I mean, I'm speaking to you here from my office. Over on this wall here, which you can't see, I've got a lot of vinyl records. And I love vinyl records, and it doesn't make any sense. They're super heavy. They're expensive nowadays. And I could just listen to it on Spotify, but it's not the same. So is it entirely rational? No, but it's still true. And I think with language learning in particular, there's something about the way that course books are designed that people like to fill in different aspects of the book and use it in different ways that to this day still the technology that we have, it just isn't as good. It just isn't as good. Syra asks about self-regulated professional development is very important. Why are teachers a bit resistant and how to motivate them? This is a really horrible question, Syra. It's so difficult because anyone who's involved in teacher development like I am, this is always the question that comes up where people will talk about teacher development. And at some point, someone says, yeah, but what do we do with the teachers who don't want to do it? Okay, so what I would say is, I think we need to see this as part of our jobs. Okay, it's part of our job to do this. I want my doctor to be someone who stays in touch with medical advances. I want my lawyer to be someone who's up to date with how the law changes. And I want my teacher to be aware of what's going on and developing as a professional. It's tough to deal with those teachers. And I think that with, the main message I would give is, because if you're here today, then you've made the effort to come to this, then I'm not really describing you because you're here. You're someone who cares about your professional development. But I think the main thing is often in the very early stages of teacher development, initial teacher training, I think teachers need to be made aware that this is part of entering this profession. Being in education, wherever we do it, for any age group, even adults, is a responsibility that it's a serious job. We have a role in society. We shape society to some degree. And think about all the thousands of students that you would teach throughout a career. How much interaction you've had with those students. I think just people need to be aware that it's part of the job. And if you're an employer, then try and employ teachers who know that. But it's a tough situation, I know. Let's see. Nejra asks, is teaching writing skills, essays, for example, really dead considering everything? It's such an interesting question. I think that it probably won't be dead because there will be a requirement in some places that students are going to be required to display a level of knowledge and analysis that the essay lends itself to. So they're going to require students to be able to do this. Now, of course, you could say, well, then they can just get the AI to do it for them. I think in those institutions, they may find ways where that just isn't possible. I mean, in the short term, they probably find ways of saying, okay, we're going back to pen and paper. You have to sit in a room. Here's the question. So I think that for those kind of situations, there is a genuine use for being able to write an essay. I think it's an important skill because it's a way of demonstrating your knowledge. But then they may find other ways of doing that that can demonstrate the same thing. I think it would be a shame. Of course, another thing for language development is that writing skills are really useful, not just as a means of producing the final product, but as a way of practicing. You know, when we practice speaking skills, we don't always practice speaking as a means of ending with a final product. The speaking itself is the process. So going through the process of writing is just really good practice. So I would hope that we keep writing going and that we find a way of doing it. We've got a lot of stuff to figure out, and it's all very context dependent: age group, location, access to technology, and so on. Just quickly then, Alini asks, could I repeat what I said? What kind of teacher will be replaced? I said the teacher that is going through the motions, the teacher that doesn't really try, the one that just tells students, do this, do that. They don't really interact with them. They don't give to them. This is the kind of teacher that is kind of going to be easy to replace.
We might have time for one more quick question if you'd like to, James.
Sure. Okay. Varvara asks, will the next generation of teachers appreciate the values you described? I think older teachers agree more with what you described as a good teacher. A very interesting question. I hope so, because I hope what I'm describing here has always been true and will always be true about education and why education is so important. I think that it was always like this. And that was a problem with old education systems, that they didn't reflect, they didn't build into this. They were too impersonal, too cold. And this was an issue then. And I think now we understand this much better, but then now we're at risk from another direction. So I hope that, especially as you learn, as you do the job, and as you spend time and you realize what it means to be a teacher, you begin to appreciate that, yes, these values of connection and empathy are really quite fundamental human characteristics. Okay. There we go. So thank you again, everyone. That was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for all your interaction.
Much. That was an absolutely engaging and wonderful session, James. Thank you so much for that. And as Bianca recently said in the chat box, also really reassuring. So thank you so much. Everybody in the chat box, give James some love for that wonderful talk.